Well, you know, in this video series, I have to ask the question. So here I ask, do you remember the Calgary Cardinals or the Calgary Expos? I personally did not, because when I look at this team here, much of this history either predates me or was in my infancy. However, just like with many teams that I've been doing in my Remember the Calgary series, we'll take a look at the history of Calgary sports teams in the past year. As a Calgary sports fan as myself here, which is what I mostly do on my YouTube channel, so if you want to follow along, as I always say, with this Calgary sports fan journey, just make sure you hit like, subscribe, as I talk mostly about the Calgary teams that we have now here. However, this fun project was something that I just thought of, and some inspiration to do my Remember the Calgary series, and I just randomly picked out an order of teams, but I purposely put a couple towards the end here, as this Calgary team, the Cardinals and Expos, you would say laid the foundation for a major minor league baseball team that we would have later here. Was run by the same owner who brought in the Cardinals and the Expos. And yes, those nicknames do sound familiar if you're a baseball fan, as Calgary did play a role in both the St. Louis Cardinals and then the Montreal Expos, as that's what I'll talk about in this episode. And also throw in some extra inning content where we'll take a look at other baseball teams that Calgary's had in the past. And yes, I'll stress about a couple teams after the Cardinals and Expos that will get separate episodes later in the series. And also, if you want to look at the last episode right here, I talked about the Drillers and Crush past basketball teams here, but now we're back on the diamond here. So this is going to kind of be a three-parter episode here. I'm going to count this as one team the same with the Cardinals and Expos, is just the affiliation that was associated with it, which they donned that nickname. And then, of course, the extra innings, we'll take a look at other baseball teams from the past that I found on Baseball Reference, but not enough to make a video on. Or, as you know, I especially found out 2 episodes ago when I talked about the Calgary Tigers that finding history, especially if it almost is 100 years ago, gets a little iffy here. So let's get going on talking about this Calgary baseball team. And of course, my inspiration to do this, Remember the Calgary series was I did the Calgary Hitmen Corral series, and then I also found this company, See a Dead Clothing. And also, See a Dead Clothing also led me to a website where I'll share some links in the description, some Alberta dugout stories here, talking about baseball in Alberta's history. And of course, there was that Chris Wilson story where he showed mostly his hockey jersey collection there. So that is definitely lots of inspiration there. And seeing of Calgary in baseball, I did a personal vlog 59 where I talked about Calgary baseball memories and my memories here too, but I don't have as much memories with this because much of it predated me and was before my time or in my infancy. So let's talk about this particular team. First, they were known as the Cardinals and the Expos here. As this team was in the Pioneer League playing at the rookie level, so keep in mind here that the players that were on this team were affiliated with the Major League Baseball club here, and there'll definitely be some intriguing names that played for this team that had went to the major leagues. But there's one player in particular that I would say you definitely might remember and would say had a huge influence on the country that he was from. But this is just rookie level, which is kind of like the single A here. They play a shorter season from June till September here, and they're all just rookies before they work their way up in the organization before getting to the show here. And then they played their home games yes at Foothills Stadium, which I also will share an article and touch on it towards the end of the video here, but I think that stadium is also in extra innings, down by a run with one out left here, because that stadium is definitely showing signs of decay, and then with plans of developing a new field house near Mcmahon Stadium here. I think Foothills Stadium also was known as Burns Stadium when the Cannons were in. I think that stadium is history here, but that's where these teams played their home games. And Russ Parker. Yes, the same Russ Parker who owned this team first, but he had visions of Calgary getting a higher level team, who was the owner of this team when they were associated with the St. Louis Cardinals and the Montreal Expos. He used to be the commissioner of the Alberta Major Baseball League, so definitely was a predominant Calgary businessman that loved baseball. So yeah, Russ Parker was a part behind this team before you could say his baby with the Calgary Cannons, which yes, that will be later, much later in the series. I think I have it pegged as episode 24. If you see my introduction video, I talk about the teams there. So yeah, I'll put some links that you can take a look at for Pioneer Baseball, but basically it's a rookie level league baseball that operated mostly in the Rocky Mountain region in the U.S., especially now, but it did operate some teams in Canada here. I know Lethbridge and Medicine Hat also had some teams as well in this Pioneer League that also was affiliated with respective baseball in major leagues here. So that's what basically the Pioneer League is, and they play a shorter season basically in the summer months where you can get the best weather here. So that's what Pioneer League baseball here. So yeah, the Calgary Cardinals were a minor league baseball team located in Calgary. They only played for 2 seasons in 1977 and 1978, and they were a member of the Pioneer League, third clear. And yes, the Calgary Cardinals were associated or affiliated with the St. Louis Cardinals here. And then they said the Cardinals and the Medicine Hat A's, and yes, the Medicine Hat, they were affiliated with the Oakland Athletics. They were expansion teams in 1977. And then after 1978, where this team comes into play, they changed their affiliation to the Expos. So from 1979 to 1984, the franchise changed and rebranded as the Calgary Expos, and they were the Calgary Expos, affiliated with the Montreal Expos, until that team got sold or relocated to Salt Lake City, because Russ Parker bought the Salt Lake City AAA team and moved to the Calgary and named themselves as the Calgary Cannons, and that was an upgrade because that was a AAA team, but we'll talk more in depth about the Cannons in that episode much later in the series, so you can follow along with the other teams that I've talked about here. So the 2 seasons that the Calgary Cardinals played here, they were managed by under Johnny Lewis here. However, they didn't do as well in the standings here as in the first season. They were 34 and 36. They finished 4th, did not make the playoffs. And then the second season they were a little better at 37-32 here. They finished 3rd, but they did not make the playoffs. So there was no playoffs for the Calgary Cardinals, but there was a little more success when I get to the Expos part here. And then there were a couple of All-Stars that were named in this league here. In 1977, you had Ty Waller, who was a third baseman here. He actually did ultimately play for the St. Louis Cardinals in 1980. And he was a Chicago Cub from 1981 to 1982. And then he also was back in the major leagues as a Houston Astro here. So we did have one player that ultimately played in the show here. And then they also had Leroy Rossini, a shortstop. Those are the 2 All-Stars in 1977. In 1978, you had Dennis Delaney, who was a catcher, and then Axel Vegas, who was a pitcher. So those are the 4 players that were All-Stars in this in this league here was the Calgary Cardinals here. And then other notable alumni is you got Barry Chessman and Jim Gott from 1977 here. They highlight here that Barry Chessman here also played, actually no, it's a different, I looked in the Wikipedia there and it talked about PGA players here. I think maybe that's where that link came in. And then there's Jim Gott here, who was a coach and a baseball pitcher here, and he's with the Phillies right now as a coach from 2018 now here. But Jim Gott, who also played some time in the major leagues here, he actually was a Toronto Blue Jay from 1982 to 1984. Then he played for the San Francisco Giants 1985, 1987. Then he was a Pittsburgh Pirate from 1987 to 89. Then he played for the Los Angeles Dodgers from 1990 to 1994, and then he last played in the major leagues as a Pittsburgh Pirate in 1995 here. And then overall, his career in the major leagues, he was 56-74 with a 3.87 run average, and he struck out 837, and he was a closer with 91 saves here. So you could say he's probably the most notable Calgary Cardinal. So that's where their career started here. So if you look at the the stat screw here, just for the stats here, let's just say when I bring up the stats here, I would say the best pitchers with the best record, you had Dennis Morton and Wayne Anderson here. Actually, Jim Gott, the player that we just highlighted here, in 1977 he was 3-4 with a winning percentage of .429. However, his earned run average was a .955, so didn't look good as early there, but there were definitely a lot more runs here. And then when it comes to strikeouts here, he had 60 strikeouts, so that was his record in the rookie day there. And then Ty Waller, who also another player I highlighted here, he led the team in RBIs at 77 with 8 home runs, and then you got James Reeves, who was 9 home runs and 51 RBIs, and then you had Larry Silver, who had 10 home runs and 74 RBIs, all played 60 plus games here. And then Leroy Rossini, one of the All-Stars here, he had 3 home runs and 30 RBIs here. So yeah, this stat screw here, which I'll put the links in the description here, actually shows like all the stats here. Actually, yeah, there was a Barry Chessman here on the stat screw. This one has him. He was a shortstop there, but he only played 10 games. So that's the batting stats here. That's from 1977 for the Calgary Cardinals here. And then in 1978 here, let's just take a quick look at the 1978 season here. You could say, Paul Rosiski was the top pitcher, same as Curtis Coward, with a 7.2 7.3 record, respectively here. Who led the team in the RBIs was Jim McKnight, where he had Raymond Rigas, who had 49 RBIs, but only 1 home run here. But there wasn't too many home runs, but we played a lot of small ball by the look of these stats here in 1978 here. So that's the Calgary Cardinals here. And then, of course, there'll be a description where we'll talk about Russ Parker and the pioneer of the Calgary Cardinals here, so you can read that as well here. But he had visions of getting baseball in Calgary here, and eventually, he was patient enough to at least land a Pioneer League team, but he had visions on higher up baseball, which eventually got the Calgary Cannons here. And then when he talks about the Calgary Expos here, is when they changed the affiliation here. Lethbridge actually used to be affiliated with the Montreal Expos in the same league here, so after a couple of years, Calgary got that affiliation here. So that's what this one briefly talks about in this article here. So that's just basically all the storyline with the Calgary Cardinals, but they only played 2 seasons in the Pioneer League here. So now when it comes to the Calgary Expos here, they were in Calgary for the Expos, affiliated with the Montreal Expos, which is Cappy was failing to have. They played in 1979 to 1984, also playing at the same rookie level, and they also did play at the Foothills Stadium here. And once again, it talks about they were the expansion cousins with the Medicine Hat A's, who joined the league in 1977. That's done. Calgary was affiliated with the St. Louis Cardinals of the Major Leagues, and then the team changed to the Expos in 1979 when they switched affiliations. And then this franchise relocated to Salt Lake City, Utah, to become the Trappers here to make room for the Calgary Cardinals. So that's why that team moved to Salt Lake City, as Russ Parker bought the team, the AAA team from Salt Lake City, and moved it to Calgary to be the Calgary Cardinals, and they were in the Pacific Coast League there. So we'll talk more in depth about that in that episode. So season by season here, actually the Calgary Expos had a little more success than the Montreal Expos here. Then in 1979 they were 34-36. They finished second here. However, in 1980 they didn't do as well. They were 23-46. Finished third here, but in 1981 they finished first with a record of 46-24. They went to the league championship there, but they lost to the as they qualified to playoffs twice. They lost to the Butte Copper Kings 3-2 in 1981 in the league championship series. So definitely there were some teams in Montana there. 1982 they were not as good. They were 25-45, finished third. But in 1983, once again, they finished first at 48-28 here. However, they did not win the league championship as they lost to another team based out of Montana, the Billings Mustangs, 3-1 in the 1983 series. So I assume it was a best of 5 here. And then the last season that the Calgary Expos were in Calgary before that franchise moved to the Salt Lake City, where eventually we got the Calgary Cannons. They were 28-42 for fourth in the division there. And basically the average attendance for both teams here was just around 1,000 there. I know in that one article, I'll eventually show that picture, it showed Foothills Stadium in 1977 where Russ Parker was addressing the fans there. That stadium definitely got expanded and renovated a few times over its history there, so there definitely wasn't as many fans in the stands, or the capacity wasn't as big enough when we had these teams before the Calgary Cannons here. So notable alumni here, well, we had Bob Bailey, who played in 1979, and just take a look at Bob Bailey here. He plays a third baseman here. He actually was towards the end of his career here, because he was he was a third baseman here, and he played for the Pittsburgh Pirates from 1962 to 1966. I think this isn't the same one here, because sometimes with Wikipedia you get one name that looks famous here. I don't think it's that Bob Bailey here, but then there's Steve Boros from 1980, who also played. Must be another famous name here going on by that website here. However, I know this one is true here. As the Calgary Expos, they had Andres Gallaraga. Remember Andres Gallaraga, who played 1979-1980? He was also known or nicknamed as the Big Cat here. One of the best baseball players to ever play out of Venezuela here, as he was a 5-time Major League Baseball All-Star here. He definitely had a pretty good career, because overall in his career from the Caracas, Venezuela here, he had a .288 batting average overall with 2,333 hits, 399 home runs, and 1,425 runs batted in here. You're not too sure he might be on the line if you consider Andres Gallaraga Hall of Famer here as a first baseman here. As in his Major League Baseball career, he did play actually a lot of his time with the Montreal Expos, but I also do remember him having a lot of success with the Colorado Rockies and the Atlanta Braves here. So in his career here, from 1985 to 1991, he had his first stint with the Montreal Expos. And then he went to the St. Louis Cardinals in 1992, all fitting, Expos and Cardinals here. And then in 1993-97, he was a Colorado Rocky. And then he was an Atlanta Brave from 1998 and 2000. And then in 2001, he played for 2 different teams. He played for the Texas Rangers and the San Francisco Giants in 2001. And then in 2002, he actually went back to the Montreal Expos for a year. And then in 2003, he was a San Francisco Giant. And in 2004, he was an Anaheim Angel before he retired here. And I know that the most recent World Baseball Classic, I think in 2008, he was the manager of the Venezuelan team here. So his career stats and highlights: he was a 5-time All-Star in 1988, 1993, 97, 98, 2000. He won the Gold Glove Award both times, actually, as an Expo in 1989, 1990. And he won the Silver Slugger in 1988. 1996, he was a batting champion for the National League in 1993. Home run leader in 1996, and NL RBI leader from in 96-97 here. So he definitely had a great Major League Baseball career. You almost got to wonder if this guy, Andres Gallaraga, will eventually get into the Hall of Fame here. And he was nicknamed for the Big Cat here, which actually translated from English as El Gran Gato. So that's probably how he got his name there, because it almost sounds like that if you translate it here. But so yeah, Andres Gallaraga, he definitely spent some time in Calgary in his early baseball days here to eventually have a great career. And I'm going to say he's definitely the most famous of the alumni of the two teams here. So let's take a look at the franchise stats here and stats crew here. I think this is definitely somewhat more reliable here. But in 1979 here, which is the first season that the Expos were, Calgary was affiliated with the Expos here. They were managed by Bob Bailey then. I'm going to say the top pitcher, you got Antonio Fadel here. Let's see if Andres Gallaraga here, where his stats here. Okay, in 42 games in 1979 here, he only had a home run, or he had 4 home runs and 16 RBIs here, but this was in his early age of his career. You could say the top RBI getter was David Perez, who has actually Fernando Marin. That's how they sorted out here. You could say he was the go-to guy in 1979. We had 19 home runs and 52 RBIs here. So in 1980, let's see what Andres Gallaraga stats were with the Calgary Expos here. They were managed by Steve Barrows at that time here. And Andres Gallaraga, in 59 games, he had 4 home runs and 22 RBIs here. So he was still developing his game here, but eventually he did play with the Montreal Expos here in the major leagues. And then in 1981, as I said, they were managed by, I think they had a few different managers here. This time it was J.R. Miner, who was the manager in 1981, the first year that the Expos went to the league championship. And then in 1982, they were managed by, check it out here, this time they were managed by Bob Reese. And in 1983, they were managed by, they had several managers over time here. It was Pat Creech. 1983, the second year that the Expos went to the league championship. And then the last season that they were in Calgary before they moved to Salt Lake City, they were also managed by Pat Creech there as well. So yeah, that stats crew here, you can take a look at all the stats and all the players that were associated with the Expos here. But it's definitely interesting that we did get Andres Gallaraga, which is definitely an interesting name to hear and say. Andres Gallaraga. So yeah, another Alberta Dugout link here talks about, you know, how Calgary eventually got the Calgary Cannons here, which I'll share that link in the description here, but it showed some pictures about Russ Parker and packing up the Calgary Expos before we got the Calgary Cannons here. So that's basically the brief history of talking about the Calgary Cardinals and the Calgary Expos, as Calgary were a part of the St. Louis Cardinals and the Montreal Expos at the rookie level here, and definitely had some bigger, intriguing names that eventually make a show, but I would say Andres Gallaraga is the most famous of them all here. So now when we get to the last part, I'll call it the extra innings part of this video here, here are some other teams that I would say represented Calgary from the past and the future based on Baseball Reference here, as these are all the teams that were listed here, and it's definitely a little iffy on finding all the team records here. I mean, I have all the links in description here, but the first Calgary baseball team, they said it was D level. If you go all the way back to 1907, which we're going back over 100 years ago, in the Western Canada League, there was the Calgary Bronchos, which that sounds interesting. The Calgary Bronchos. And then in 1909, there was a team in the Western Canada League, the Calgary Cowboys. So definitely using a lot of those Western names here, but I would say the most famous Calgary Cowboys team that we have, if you look at episode 3, where I talked about the World Hockey Association team. But there was a Calgary Cowboys baseball team, and then from 1910 to 1914, Calgary Bronchos was in the Western Canada League, and they were all in the D level, which is probably the lowest level, or different classifications then. So Calgary still played some minor league baseball back 100 years ago. Then the Calgary Bronchos from 1920, 21, 22 year, they upgraded to B level. So we definitely had a higher up in the baseball chain, if you call it that way, where you have the, now you have like this single A, double A, triple A before you get into the major leagues here. So that's why you got a lot of baseball all over here. And then it was the Western International League that the Calgary Bronchos were last season in 1922, according to Baseball Reference. And then in 1953, 54 here in the Western International League, now the A level. Actually, there was a team called the Calgary Stampeders. Yeah, interesting that we had a Calgary Stampeders baseball team. Later in the series, we'll talk about the Calgary Stampeders hockey team, but you could probably say the most famous Calgary Stampeders team has got to be the current CFL team here. And then there was a 1960. Then there was no classification, but Calgary was once again in the Western Canada League, as there was the Calgary Buffaloes. We definitely have had various teams in Calgary sports named the Buffaloes here. And then the Pioneer League, which I'd say is the next level up in the rookie, where we had the Cardinals and Expos, which is the teams that I touched upon here. And then 1985, and all the way till 2002 here, which will get its own separate episode. It was a AAA team where we had the Calgary Cannons, which I would say that's probably the team that I say from that most Calgary sports fans will miss the most here. And then in 2003, which if you go back to episode 2 in this series, there was the Calgary Outlaws in the short-lived Canadian Baseball League, which definitely the Outlaws did well, but they did not finish the season. And that was kind of just a filler to miss the Calgary Cannons leaving to Albuquerque. And then there was another team that I'll talk about. It's not listed in the Baseball Reference, but it's more on a collegiate level, which is now based out of Okotoks, the Okotoks Dogs. I'll talk about the Calgary Dogs also towards the end of the series. And then the last, you can say, semi-professional baseball team that the Calgary's had, which has been almost 10 years, from 2005 till 2011 in the Northern League. They were in the Northern League from 5 to 7. Was the Calgary Vipers, and then they were in the Golden League from 2008 and 11. And yes, I'll obviously will make it a future episode talking about the Calgary Vipers, and that's the team I actually remember the most because I went to most of their games here. So yeah, Calgary's definitely had several baseball teams over the years, which I discovered while making out the episodes here. Not enough I would find enough information on to make a video on the, let's say, the Bronchos, the Cowboys, the Stampeders, but there was definitely enough information there for me to talk about the Cardinals and the Expos, given they're higher up in the Baseball Development League. And then obviously I will be talking about the Cannons, Vipers, and I will also talk about the Dogs later in this series here. And then the last part here, which is another article here, is the City of Calgary ready to say goodbye to Foothills Stadium, because that stadium definitely, one of the reasons that the Calgary Cannons eventually left town was the stadium. It barely made it to triple A standards here, and definitely, it was definitely looking dated and dilapidated here, especially another stadium that we always talk about is Mcmahon Stadium here. I know that eventually we'll have a new stadium for the Calgary Flames, and then we'll start the early work in that, and 4 years we should be opening that stadium up. But there's long-term plans for a new field house near where Foothills Stadium is, if you're familiar with Calgary, around Corral Trail and near the university there. You got Mcmahon Stadium, and then you got the Foothills Athletic Park there, as well as Foothills Stadium. And definitely Foothills Stadium is definitely showing its age, and it's definitely fallen apart. It hasn't been used since the Vipers left, and the fact that it'd be nice to have a year-round field house that Calgary doesn't have but needs, and the plan is that they were going to put it on that ground here. But yeah, they definitely talks about the history here, is that the first team at Foothills for 1966-77 was constructed, but there was no professional team until 1977. So the stadium was built in 1966, but there was no professional team to house it. Then 78 talked about the Calgary Cardinals here, as in the 2 seasons they were 71-68 under Johnny Lewis. And then the Cardinals' contract at Foothills expired, and the Montreal Expos stepped up and put their rookie team here. So that's this team, the Calgary Expos, from 1979 to 85, were the first team with any staying power. So you could say this is the first baseball team that stuck around a little longer here, and talked about Andres Gallaraga being the most famous player that played for the Calgary Expos. But then that team definitely got moved to Salt Lake City to make room for the Calgary Cannons for 1985, and then we'll talk about the Calgary Cannons some more. So they played in Foothills until 2002 before they got relocated here. And then in 2003-05 here, there was a couple of baseball teams. I mentioned the Outlaws, and then there was also the Dogs, who was a summer collegiate team. But they had a disagreement with use of the stadium with the Vipers at the time as well. So that's why eventually the Calgary Dogs moved to Okotoks, and they flourished a lot more. And I want to talk about that. I'm going to say Seaman Stadium that's in Okotoks definitely a lot nicer than Foothills Stadium. And then it talks about the Vipers from 2005-11 there, and then since then, the season definitely, where the stadium's definitely been dilapidated here. There's been occasional time when the Dinos Bay University team played there, but there's not much of a baseball team at the university, so the stadium pretty much has just sat, dilapidated and falling apart. So I would say definitely it's going to be another part of Calgary sports history that's going away here, but that's why I like to make these videos here. So again, the final recap here, I mean, it's definitely neat to think that, given how big Calgary is now, that we have over 1.2 million people, yet we don't have any major or at least minor league baseball anymore in Calgary here. I think part of it is, especially I think after when the Cannons left, that the appetite wasn't there anymore, but it's just, finding a stadium, and also just the crazy weather, that if Calgary were to ever get another baseball team on a semi-professional or a minor level, that you need to put a fancier stadium. Definitely it's got to be covered here, because there was definitely some games that were snowed out when I talk about the Calgary Cannons here. But I just think it's neat that we played a role in the development for the St. Louis Cardinals and the Montreal Expos, which definitely was a much longer term team. And then Andres Gallaraga, he spent some time right here in Calgary. We can say he's one of the best Venezuelan baseball players of all time, and if he ever gets a call to the Baseball Hall of Fame, we should be being a little proud of that as Calgary sports fans here. So what do you think of the Calgary Cardinals and the Calgary Expos and some of these other teams that represented Calgary that I found online, that not enough for me to make a separate video on, but just something to throw in? And I'm going to say the fate is on the wall for Foothills Stadium, that with this new field house here, that it's definitely time to replace that stadium, because it's definitely just falling apart and it's not being used anymore. And there's no word or no plan on getting any kind of baseball in Calgary anytime soon, even on a minor league level. And I also think that another changing of the times here, that Canada is definitely a tougher market for baseball. Yes, there is the Blue Jays, which is the Major League Baseball team, but I remember getting the MVP Baseball 2005 for GameCube, and I think that was definitely one of the best baseball games at the time there, and it was very deep because you can look at teams and also has all the minor league teams from the single A up to triple A there, which there was still a team in Canada, the Ottawa Lynx, and I remember the Ottawa Lynx, I think in 2012, was the last triple A team to stay in Canada before leaving. So other than Major League Baseball, the Toronto Blue Jays, there's no triple A baseball anywhere in Canada. I know remember one team, there used to be the Vancouver Canadians, which is one of the opponents that the Calgary Cardinals played, was a triple A team. Now they're a single A team. And I know that there's pockets in Southern Ontario and in British Columbia for developing Canadian talent for baseball and interest. And I know that there is some word that I hear that Montreal is slowly trying to drum up support to look at getting baseball back. So maybe get a Major League Baseball team back. I mean, obviously it came down to a stadium, and Olympic Stadium definitely, it looked outdated when it opened and it's falling apart. And that's definitely another story to talk about why the Montreal Expos didn't last anymore in the major leagues. But that's just my final recap. That I don't see baseball ever coming back to Calgary, at least not anytime soon. And I also said that with my basketball videos here. So this is my Remember the Calgary Series for episode 7, talking about some more baseball. And I would say the Cardinals and the Expos laid the foundation to eventually get the Calgary Cannons, which I'll keep saying they'll be much later in the series here. And then episode 8, I'll plan to talk about one of the teams that I knew about existed and got rebranded in the Calgary Hitmen Corral series, the Calgary Centennials, one of the major junior hockey teams that Calgary's had over the years. And I'll talk about the Calgary Centennials in episode 8, so you can stay tuned for that. And so, as I say, if you want to follow along with this Calgary sports fan's journey, home to Flames, Hitmen, Roughnecks, and Stampeders, and now I could say formerly home to the Cardinals and Expos. I mostly talk Calgary sports on my channel, and definitely this has been one fun series to look back on Calgary sports teams from the past. It's what this series is all about. What I've been doing is it's all in a separate playlist, and also in the description of my introduction, where I list all the episodes that I talked about and plan to talk about. I'll put the new link to each video as it goes up in that description, so you can take a look at particular episodes on teams that I talked about and still plan to talk about. I also do have personal vlogs, and you can see personal vlog 59, where I briefly just talked about Calgary baseball memories, at least when I've been around, which also kind of inspired this. And I also do some attempt at comedy, and I do share my experience today. I'm on the road or at a sport event here, so if it all sounds like it'd be interesting to watch, to follow along with this Calgary sports fan's journey, you know what you need to do. Just make sure you hit like, subscribe. I also have my other social media links down in the description below here, and I'll have all the links in the description for the teams and where to get the stats, and as well as some of the relics that I share in this video. Some old pictures and programs of these two teams of existing here. So anyway, as I say, I'll see you in the next video, and thanks for watching along, and thanks for all the support on following my YouTube channel. And I just want to continue growing, and looking forward to making some more Remember the Calgary Series episodes, sharing what I found and remember in some cases, or what I found just before my time on Calgary sports teams in the past. So I'll see you then.